One of the most intriguing paradoxes in human relationships. Why avoidants, those stoic masters of emotional distance, can suddenly feel a surge of panic when you choose to go silent? How is it that the very people who appear so detached, so perfectly content in solitude, can be startled by your departure into silence? Together, we shall peel back the layers of this paradox, weaving stories and examples into a tapestry of insight. Take a seat, if you please, and let us begin. Let us set the stage. An avoidant often presents an air of calm aloofness, as though they are insulated from the swirling chaos of emotions that plague the rest of us. They may give short answers, keep personal details locked away, and maintain a polite, though impenetrable, emotional wall. Naturally, the question arises, if they're so indifferent, why on earth would they panic if I go silent? The key, dear viewer, is recognizing that an avoidance distance is not necessarily born of disinterest. Indeed, it often arises from a deep-seated fear of being overwhelmed by their own emotions or by the expectations of another. Keeping people at bay is their time-tested strategy for self-preservation. By controlling the flow of connection, they keep heartbreak or entanglement at a tolerable distance. But here is the crux of our evening's inquiry. Even the most stoic among us have a fundamental need for human contact, however subdued that need may appear. The avoidant may not waltz up to you, arms open wide, proclaiming unconditional love and devotion. Yet there exists within them a fragile tether to those in their orbit. When that tether is abruptly severed, when you fall silent, it can jolt them out of their carefully maintained comfort zone and stir a panic they did not anticipate. Now, let us delve deeper. Picture, if you will, a towering medieval fortress perched upon a rocky cliff. Its gates are shut tight, its walls thick and foreboding. The keepers of the fortress, our dear avoidants, roam the corridors, ensuring no one lingers too long. No visitor wanders too close to the courtyard where vulnerability lies. While these caretakers excel at maintaining the illusion of self-sufficiency, they do keep an occasional watch on the horizon, half expecting your presence in the distance. When you, who have been softly tapping at the gates, abruptly fade into silence, a subtle alarm stirs inside the fortress. Where have they gone? Wonders the guard in the tower. Is something amiss? The avoidant's first reaction might be a sense of relief. After all, no one's crowding the gates. But soon enough, a restless disquiet creeps in. Their routine is disrupted. The faint but reliable knocks at the castle door have vanished. The calm they cherish begins to feel more like an echo chamber, and in that echo, a wave of panic can arise. This sense of panic seldom manifests as dramatic outbursts. Avoidants are too well practiced in the art of composure. Instead, the panic might take subtler forms, a lingering thought at the back of their mind. I wonder if they're all right, or have I offended them? Or perhaps even, did they find someone else who doesn't keep them at arm's length? These worries, left unchecked, can swirl into an undercurrent of anxiety that eventually compels the avoidant to peer from their tower windows, searching for signs of your presence. Allow me to share a little story. We shall call this account the tale of the quiet garden party. Many years ago, I had the pleasure of attending a gathering hosted by a dear friend, a fellow of refined taste and a certain emotional reserve, as many avoidants do. Let us name him Alistair, ever so charming in public, but notoriously reluctant to disclose personal details. He had a close friend, Lucy, who had long adored his refined wit and subtle sense of humor. She was the sort who might call him on a whim or send him amusing anecdotes. Alistair, for the most part, neither encouraged nor discouraged these gestures. He seemed content to remain politely distant, never quite reciprocating Lucy's warmth, yet never openly rejecting it either. But one day, Lucy, noticing her goodwill wasn't exactly reciprocated, withdrew. No more calls, no more texts. She carried on with her life, focusing on her own affairs, And then came the garden party. Oh, it was a lovely afternoon. Tea, biscuits, polite conversation. Alistair, wandering among the guests with his usual detached grace, found himself scanning the crowd. Lucy was conspicuously absent. Something strange happened. Alistair, who had never once asked after Lucy's whereabouts at any previous event, quietly pulled me aside. His tone was measured, yet tinged with genuine concern. "Has Lucy been unwell?" He feigned an air of casual curiosity, but I discerned the subtle tremor in his voice. He repeated a question or two about whether Lucy might arrive later, or if she had departed for some reason. It dawned on me then. In Lucy's absence, Alistair had, for the first time, felt the unsettling pang of her silence. Why did he respond this way? Because Lucy's consistent presence, her calls, her friendly messages, had quietly anchored Alistair's social world. He had grown used to her brand of kindness, even if he never reciprocated with equal fervor. When she abruptly went silent, it destabilized him, like removing a quiet but essential pillar from beneath a well-tended roof. We must examine the deeper undercurrents fueling this panic. Avoidants, as a rule, have built fortresses around themselves due to some primary fear. Fear of getting hurt, fear of being trapped in uncomfortable intimacy, or fear of losing autonomy. Yet in constructing these defenses, they inadvertently create a realm of emotional isolation that can leave them hungry for companionship, even if they cannot admit it outright. When the one who usually reaches out suddenly withdraws, the avoidant's fundamental worry, being left truly alone, gets triggered. You see, despite their self-reliant facade, they still desire a certain degree of connection. It is a delicate balance, enough closeness to feel less lonely, but not so much as to overwhelm them. When you go silent, the scale tips in the other direction, and they realize they may have, in their wariness, taken your presence for granted. In that realization, panic brews. They wonder if they have inadvertently driven you away, or if perhaps your silence signifies something more ominous, like the possibility that you've concluded they are unworthy of your continued efforts. This insecurity, normally kept well out of sight, can bubble to the surface, leaving them unsettled. More often than not, they try to keep this panic hidden, but it colors their mood and compels them to re-examine the dynamic they once felt so certain they controlled. Now, let us speak of silence itself. Our world seems enamored with noise, with constant connectivity. Many fear the hush that follows when words stop. Yet, ironically, silence can be a profound communication tool, especially in relationships with avoidance. When your attempts at conversation, closeness, or emotional honesty yield no progress, a decision to pull back, gracefully but firmly, can speak volumes. Genuine space. By withdrawing without theatrics or guilt, you grant the avoidant precisely what they claim to want: space. However, there is a subtle difference between the space they artificially engineer to keep you at bay and the space that emerges when you simply stop trying. The latter tends to rattle them, for it is no longer their controlled distance, it is yours. Self-respect. Going silent, in a healthy self-respecting way, signals that you will not chase them indefinitely. You acknowledge that you too have boundaries, that your time and emotional availability are not to be taken for granted. This can prompt the avoidant to rethink the dynamic. Mirroring their behavior. If the avoidance pattern is to reciprocate minimally, your newfound silence mirrors back the isolation they created. It confronts them with their own strategy. Suddenly, they see the potential consequences of pushing people away. You just might leave for good. Shifting control. Avoidants often feel safer when they are the ones maintaining emotional boundaries, but once you withdraw, you shift the balance of control. Now they must decide if they wish to venture out from the fortress, and whether the desire for connection outweighs the fear of vulnerability. Thus, your silence can act as a gentle yet potent mirror, reflecting the avoidance actions back to them. It is not manipulative if done with integrity and self-care. Rather, it is a declaration of independence. I will no longer invest myself where I am not seen or heard. That message, ironically, can jolt the avoidant into a moment of clarity, and yes, panic. Allow me a moment to share a small parable that illustrates this dynamic in a more allegorical sense. In a remote village, there was a well from which water flowed freely, day after day. The villagers visited it regularly, filling their buckets, never stopping to think about the well's importance or its willingness to give. But one day, the well, exhausted from being overdrawn without care, ran dry. The villagers arrived to find no water. Alarmed, they scurried about in confusion. They realized, too late, that they had not maintained or appreciated the well. They had never considered what might happen if it stopped flowing. The avoidant is akin to a villager, dipping into your emotional reserve whenever needed, all while believing the well will always be there. When you go silent, run dry, so to speak, they experience a rush of panic, akin to thirst. Although they never expected to rely on you, they discover they had come to depend on the steady drip of your presence. Deprived of it, they confront their own vulnerability and the potential loneliness that lies on the other side of their fortress. When the avoidant panics, they might not declare it openly. Far from it. Instead, you might observe more discreet signs. Random check-ins. The avoidant might send a casual message, disguised as polite curiosity. Hey, just wondering how you've been. The subtext, of course, is, are you still there? Are you still an option for conversation? Increased social media interest. Perhaps they start liking your posts or watching your stories after a long period of inattention. They're peeking around the digital corner to see if you're truly gone or simply taking a hiatus. Indirect inquiries through friends. Suddenly, mutual acquaintances mention the avoidant asking about you. The fortress keeper is too cautious to reach out directly, so they settle for stealthy reconnaissance, mild irritability, or passive-aggressive remarks. Some avoidants, perplexed by their unease, might lash out with subtle critiques. Oh, you're too busy now, are you? This could be their clumsy way of signaling confusion or hurt. Each of these behaviors, though hardly dramatic, speaks to an undercurrent of panic. They're testing the waters, wondering if your silence is permanent or if you might be coaxed back into the old dynamic. Another thread woven into the avoidance panic is regret. Many avoidants, though they rarely articulate it, harbor a quiet longing for deeper connection. They've simply convinced themselves it is safer to withhold. However, when someone they care about, or at least rely upon for consistent interaction, withdraws, the avoidant may grapple with unanticipated remorse. They recall moments they could have been kinder, more open, or at least more appreciative. Their fortress walls feel less like noble protections and more like barriers that have locked them into loneliness. While this realization can inspire them to reach out, or at least check in, it also breeds a kind of sorrowful panic. Have I let my defensive stance rob me of something precious? They may fear it's too late to rectify matters, fueling further anxiety. Let us pause for a moment to clarify that your silence should never be a manipulative ploy. Manipulation, after all, corrodes trust. If you choose silence solely to provoke the avoidant or to punish them, the resulting dynamic can become toxic. They may sense the manipulation and entrench themselves even deeper. However, if your silence arises from genuine self-preservation, if you've sincerely reached a point where continuing to pursue the avoidant is no longer healthy, then stepping back can be a natural, even necessary boundary. It can, in fact, be the only path to growth for both parties. For the avoidant, panic becomes the catalyst that compels them to introspect. For you, the silence becomes a chance to reclaim emotional balance. Imagine, if you will, the swirling thoughts behind that stoic exterior once they register your absence. I didn't expect them to vanish so abruptly. Did I push too hard? I said I preferred my space, but do I truly want no contact at all? They might think I don't care. Should I show them I do? But what if that leads me into deeper intimacy than I can handle? Maybe they found someone else. Maybe I should have been more attentive. Observe how these musings reveal the avoidance ambivalence. They relish independence, yet fear isolation. They yearn for a degree of closeness, yet dread engulfment. Your silence accentuates this tension, forcing them to confront the possibility that their cherished distance has a cost. Why do avoidants often maintain a certain equilibrium until you cut ties? A clue lies in the relationship between their self-worth and their interpersonal stance. Contrary to popular belief, not all avoidants brim with self-confidence. Some have a fragile sense of self, propped up by the idea that they can remain unscathed if they never open up fully. When you go silent, you effectively remove the scaffolding that let them feel they could keep a mild handle on your connection. In that moment, they question whether they deserved your presence in the first place. If self-esteem is shaky, the panic intensifies. They left. It must be because I am unworthy. This fear can be masked behind a veneer of indifference or even mild indignation. Yet beneath that, an avoidant often wrestles with significant self-doubt. So, the panic sets in. The fortress walls tremble with the footsteps of uncertainty. What next? Let us consider a few possible scenarios. They pretend nothing's amiss. This is common. The avoidant might bury their panic, carrying on as though your silence doesn't faze them. They hope you'll break the silence first, restoring the status quo. Inside, though, the tension simmers. They send a tentative olive branch. Perhaps they muster the courage to reach out with a casual, "Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" This is a timid step, a subdued signal that they are, in fact, concerned. They wait too long. Tension grows. In some cases, each day of silence builds a taller wall of pride. They become increasingly reluctant to make the first move, fearing it might look desperate. Both parties remain in limbo, separated by unvoiced concern. They attempt a conversation about feelings. This is the most promising scenario, albeit less common. If the panic and regret are strong enough, an avoidant may initiate a deeper conversation, acknowledging the dynamic that pushed you away and seeking some middle ground. They lash out in frustration. Frustration is a cousin to fear. If your silence feels like a betrayal, they may respond with anger or blame shifting, either to you or to themselves. While uncomfortable, such conflict can sometimes open pathways to honest dialogue, if handled with care. Regardless of how they respond, the panic they experience underscores a crucial truth. Your presence held more significance than they were willing to admit. In reflecting on this phenomenon, why avoidants panic when you go silent, we glean a certain wisdom. Ironically, the best way to be heard by someone who excels at keeping distance is sometimes to say nothing. Not out of spite or revenge, but out of self-respect and an acknowledgement that one-sided efforts rarely yield a balanced relationship. A calm, graceful exit can shift the dynamic, shining a spotlight on what the avoidant is truly prepared to lose in their quest for emotional safety. If they discover that losing you is too high a price, they may reconsider their approach. If not, your silence frees you from the exhausting cycle of pursuit, giving you the liberty to invest your energy where it is reciprocated. Permit me to share another brief anecdote. I once knew a woman, Sylvia, who was deeply enamored with a man named Thomas. Thomas was the quintessential avoidant, friendly yet consistently elusive. Sylvia, however, persisted, inviting him to lakeside picnics, sending heartfelt letters detailing her day, always trying to coax him into deeper conversations. Thomas never outright rejected these gestures, but he neither embraced them. He merely hovered at arm's length, offering polite half-answers. At last, worn down, Sylvia decided she needed a break. She wrote a final, cordial note. "I sense you need space, and I respect that. I'll step back now. Should you wish to talk, you know where to find me." Then, resolute, she went silent. For 3 weeks, Thomas seemed unaffected, carrying on as usual. Sylvia busied herself with other pursuits, painting, traveling, rediscovering the joys of solitude. Then came the 4th week, and a curious text from Thomas arrived. "How have you been? I miss hearing your stories." That seemingly casual line belied a certain urgency. He confessed, in halting phrases, that her silence had made him realize just how much her presence colored his life. Although he still struggled with closeness, the prospect of losing her altogether sparked a dread that overshadowed his fear of intimacy. What followed was not a fairy tale romance, but it was a shift. Thomas, prodded by the uneasy quiet, initiated contact and attempted more openness than ever before. Sylvia, by claiming her own space, gave him the impetus he needed, panic and all, to reconsider his comfortable distance. Yes, ironically, avoidance can be more comfortable when someone else is doing the chasing. Why? Because the moment you chase, they can choose how close to let you get. They hold the power to yield a little or to hold back. They never have to confront the emptiness that your absence might create. And so, ironically, your silence disrupts that dynamic. It deprives them of the comfort of passive acceptance. With your silence, they can no longer pretend that interactions, or their absence, mean nothing. The sudden vacuum left behind can trigger those pangs of longing, and, with longing, the seeds of panic. That panic says, "Wait, I might lose something of value here." This epiphany may be fleeting, but it can be potent, acting as a crack in the fortress wall. Now, dear viewer, let us temper our observations with a realistic caution. An avoidance panic does not necessarily guarantee that they will transform into a fully open, emotionally secure partner overnight. Old patterns run deep. The panic may prompt them to reach out, to test the waters, or to show a flicker of vulnerability. But consistent change requires self-awareness, patience, and often professional help or personal reflection. Nevertheless, the significance of that initial panic is that it dispels the illusion that avoidants are always unfeeling or indifferent. Their flight from intimacy doesn't preclude them from feeling fear or regret when a valued connection slips away. This realization alone can be a turning point, for it forces them to reckon with the contradictions in their approach to relationships. At the heart of this phenomenon lies a delicate dance of self-discovery for both sides. For you, silence can be a moment of reclaiming your power, recognizing that you need not plead for scraps of attention. For the avoidant, the panic that surfaces can be a call to self-examination. If I truly don't care, why does their absence trouble me so? If I desire solitude above all else, why am I haunted by the hush they left behind? When confronted by these questions, an avoidant might, if they are courageous, begin to unravel the deeper threads of their own emotional history, childhood fears, past rejections, or beliefs about dependency and self-worth. It is in the silent aftermath that these introspections often occur, for noise and busyness can mask anxieties. Silence lays them bare. So you might wonder, how does one transform this silent standoff into a healthier bond? If by chance the avoidant does reach out, or if you decide to re-establish communication, here are a few suggestions. Set clear boundaries. When the conversation resumes, articulate what you need from them, be it consistent check-ins, honest discussions about feelings, or mutual respect. Indicate that you value their independence, but not at the cost of your emotional well-being. Encourage gradual vulnerability. Avoid pushing them into deep emotional revelations straight away. Invite them to share small, safe aspects of their day-to-day life, building trust one step at a time. Remain attuned to their comfort level, a crucial dance step. They must also respect your comfort level. If they revert to stonewalling, do not sacrifice your own peace to accommodate them indefinitely. Acknowledge their fears gently. Sometimes the avoidant can't articulate why they withdrew. If they seem receptive, let them know you understand closeness can be daunting for them. This validation may ease their panic and reduce defensiveness. Stay true to self-care. Remember, you are not a rehabilitation center for the reluctant. If the avoidance panic subsides and they slip back into old habits, you must decide if the relationship meets your core needs. At last, we arrive at the essence of the evening's exploration. Avoidants do panic when you go silent because, beneath their carefully composed distance, they still crave human connection, albeit on a more controlled scale. The abrupt withdrawal of someone who used to reach out can startle them into recognizing the precariousness of their aloof stance. Your silence, in its own elegant way, forces them to confront the possibility of losing what they neither fully embraced nor fully discarded. While this panic doesn't necessarily guarantee a fairy tale reconciliation, it can serve as an unexpected catalyst for growth. For you, as you learn the power of boundaries, and for them, as they wrestle with the consequences of their guardedness. Whether the relationship blossoms anew or quietly fades, the knowledge gleaned from this interplay can guide you toward healthier dynamics in the future. And so we conclude, dear viewer, with the final reflection: silence can indeed speak louder than the most impassioned pleas. Through the hush of your absence, the avoidant mind may awaken to the truth that they do feel, do care, and do fear the loss of someone who once reached out. If they choose to act upon that realization, by bridging the gap, there is hope for a more honest, albeit cautious connection. If they remain within their fortress, disavowing the pang of panic as mere fleeting discomfort, then you have your answer. Your self-respect is better nurtured elsewhere. Hence, why avoidance panic when you go silent is not such a mystery after all. It is the natural outcome of a relational dynamic in which the person on the other side of the fortress finally ceases to knock. The avoidant is left with the echo of their own solitude, and in that echo, they sometimes discover that solitude is more unnerving than they were willing to admit. Take from this what you will: a lesson in respecting your own worth, understanding the hidden depth of another's fear, and recognizing that a dignified silence can be an invitation for the avoidant to step forward or remain behind the walls they have built. In either case, you stand empowered, illuminated by the knowledge that beneath every stoic exterior lies a beating heart, capable of panic when faced with the reality of genuine absence. And with that, dear viewer, may you find the balance between giving space and maintaining self-worth, a delicate dance indeed. If an avoidant stands upon the parapets of their lonely castle, glimpsing your retreat into the quiet distance, perhaps they will discover that their solitude is not quite the solace they believed it to be. Should they come forward, meet them with gentle honesty. Should they remain silent, honor your journey by carrying on, secure in the knowledge that you have done enough. And sometimes for both parties, that is the greatest gift of all.